Hello and welcome to the Practical Leadership Podcast, where leaders share their tools and practical advice to make you a better leader today. Hello, my name is Max Kozlowski. I'm going to be your host for the day. And today I have a not your average CFO financial person. We sometimes build a stereotype when we think about people that are in finance or in the financial world, on the financial side of things. Our guest today has been a leader. He's been a mentor. He's been a board of advisor, and he works on strategy, and he really understands the importance that finance plays in the business, in the role of business, in growing the business and developing the business in the greatest of scales, and also in a smaller context as well. He's seen it. He's done that. He's been there. My guest today, Otto, welcome. I'm not going to try to butcher your last name, so I'm going to let you share it with the audience.
All right. Good morning. My name's Otto Schwethelm. Good German name from the Texas Hill Country.
I would have butchered it, so thank you so much for that. Otto, so, this podcast is all about leadership. And to me, it's always really interesting to figure out when people first kind of started to understand the concept of leadership, or when it became a word or an idea that they recognized or connected with. What was that for you? When did you become aware of this idea of leadership?
A lot of it came just from my early childhood, just seeing my father, my grandfather, both of them were more or less entrepreneurs, starting their own businesses. And from that standpoint, seeing how they conducted themselves around other individuals, around their peers, around their colleagues. So it started for me at a very early age, but my experience over the years really built upon that. And I think it was when I moved from probably the first 6 years of my career was either public accounting or with the state auditors. And so there I was looking kind of from the outside in. And it was really when I first had my first assignment as a finance professional outside of auditing that I really started to feel and exercise what leadership was, of having somebody that was supervising, and I reported to somebody within an organization. And so it really gelled as I moved into my first manager of accounting role.
Yeah. And there's some exciting things happening in your world, right? So I'd love to talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Right now, I'm in a leadership role for VACO. We operate the CFO advisory practice, which is unique to any of the other VACO offices. VACO is a national professional services company, primarily focusing on accounting, IT, risk management. We have a lot of consultants in some of the bigger companies, but our particular group focuses on mid-market companies that traditionally have an owner-operator that really understands his business, but doesn't have a great deal of financial acumen. Typically, they've got a good bookkeeper or a controller, but don't have anybody that really helps the CEO really look at his business strategically. How do I create value? How do I grow the business? Or in some cases, they don't have any succession plan. So helping them think through where do they want to go with the business and creating a plan to help them get there. And so from that standpoint, there's a great deal of pleasure in helping businesses grow and create value, and seeing very clearly how you're having an impact upon that. And so I'm very privileged to have a group of right now 8 former CFOs, various industries that we have really established a foothold here in San Antonio on being able to help those companies. And so again, I think we serve a very valuable function to the San Antonio market, and trying to expand that, whether it's into the Texas Hill Country or up the I-35 corridor into the Austin area. So trying to grow that footprint to serve a broader organizational standpoint from that mid-market type of company.
Yeah. And that's one of the great, one of the big reasons why I really wanted you to be in the podcast here today, because when we think about finance people, a lot of people have this concept of them being anchors, right? You can't afford it. You shouldn't do it. Let's cut costs. And a lot of our audience are entrepreneurial. They're entrepreneurial and they are leading in different organizations where they need the resources to do and accomplish great things. And I think that that's one of the things that in our conversation, I was able to really understand that you are an enabler. You are the person that's helping figure out where are we going to need to invest? How are we going to get the investments? How are we going to uh, manage through the financial labyrinth to get to the other side? So, um, in working with leaderships, right? Like with the leadership team and the leaders in the organization, not just one individual. So, um, tell me a little bit about that role and how you think it's kind of like different than the typical, CFO mindset.
Okay. I think a lot of time, and not necessarily different from typical CFOs, because I think now the trend of CFOs is being considered more of the strategic partner of the CEO. Historically, most accountants are viewed as kind of backward looking, creating historical financials that you close the books the first 5 to 10 working days of the month, you're generating the financial statement, and then you're providing maybe some financial analysis and planning that presented to the management team or even to the board of directors, but not a whole lot given towards strategic thinking from the standpoint of, as we're looking to grow the company, what sort of capital are we going to need to invest in the business? What sort of external funding do we need? Where do we go to get that? Do we go to the public markets? Do we look at the bank from that standpoint? And that's where having experienced CFOs in various industries really brings to the table a lot of expertise that mid-market companies or even startup entrepreneurial companies don't have the resources as you're suggesting. They can't afford a full-time CFO, but that's where we serve a valuable niche from the standpoint of having somebody that come in, whether it's a week, a month, maybe a couple of days after the books are closed, to really prepare the type of analytics and really drill into what the financials are really telling the ownership group from the standpoint of, um, traditionally cash is king, that if you're not generating cash, that's an issue. And so from that standpoint, how do we think through generating more cash or doing a better job of putting the availability of cash that we currently have on hand to better use? And from that standpoint, having the experience, whether it's through um, experience M&A transactions of helping other companies grow, not just from a brownfield type of activity to a greenfield opportunity of really starting from scratch and thinking through what the different alternatives are. Because if you've never done anything, you're very much limited to thinking of what you've experienced. And so again, bringing in people that have done different deals, that have worked for different companies, that have gone through different experiences, just brings a very valuable experience to the table that helps management and ownership groups really think through to find what is the best solution.
So
Because it's different in pretty much every different case.
So being able to bring in a bunch of different tools and a bunch of different options that I might have not been available before, in understanding that there's many different ways that you can accomplish the goals and outcomes, but without understanding what the tools are, you might be trying to use the wrong tool for the job. So
Exactly.
that
Exactly. But I think you've hit it on the head.
and that sounds like a time saver, which equals money and reduction of stress and headaches. So let's go back to the idea of leadership. So you were sharing that you kind of learned about leadership, kind of growing up, picking it up from your family. How has that this idea of leadership kind of changed or evolved in your mind or in your world or in your job? What are some of your big ideas or mindset surrounding this?
I guess one of the big changes was when I left public accounting and the state auditors. I went to work and helped form a small bank holding company in the Texas Hill Country, and that was during the '80s. We invested in the typical things of the Hill Country, speculative real estate loans. All the lawyers and doctors want a ranch in the Hill Country, and so we were very much involved in those types of loans, but As you may remember, in the late 80s, real estate had a huge downturn. Unfortunately, it ate away our capital. And so experiencing a situation where I was let go because the company failed. FDIC came in and I was at the holding company. And so they were interested in making sure that banks continued operating and finding an owner for that. But being on the outside and seeing something that failed and experienced it, uh, I think more times you learn more when things go wrong than when they go right. And so experiencing that and not repeating those sorts of things gives you a different perspective. So having gone through a business that failed gave me a certain insight into what happened and why. And it also opened the door for what was probably the best personal and professional decision I ever made, which was um, 1 year after the Gulf War, I packed up and moved my family to Saudi Arabia. And talk about a culture change and a management change and giving a completely different perspective on what leadership is. Uh, I moved back into auditing, but um, the culture in the Middle East, whether it's the Arab or the Muslim culture, um, saving space is extremely important. And so being in a position of training and auditing in an Arab environment really created a situation where I had to fundamentally change the way I led and mentored, because my primary job there was training young Saudis to be auditors. And by the nature of being an auditor, you typically go in, you find things that are wrong, you write up reports and identify opportunities for improvement. But typically, what that means to people in the business is, here come the auditors, they're just looking to find something wrong. And that was very contrary to the Arab culture. And so trying to step back and finding ways to be successful in performing our audit, but at the same time, training young Arabs to be somewhat critical was a challenge. And so what I developed over the years was making sure that whether we're dealing with the management team or with the auditors, is making sure that they understood that there's certain things that the company required us to do, whether it's by policy or by procedure. Those are certain things that they needed to do. And sometimes people didn't understand it. And so we're going to find things, but we need to present our findings in a way that's not confrontational or critical, but here's how can we work together to find better ways of doing what we do to bring it more efficient, more cost effective. And so by approaching it that way, I kind of changed the way I typically approach things, from the standpoint of, how do you find a way to make recommendations without being overly critical? And that was very, very critical in the success of being able to operate. I ended up spending 7 years at Saudi Aramco. My daughters had an opportunity of growing up in different cultures, different religions, and it gave them such a competitive advantage over their peers once we moved back and they went to high school back in the United States. But I think that was a major change in the way I dealt with being a leader. And again, I think that pays dividends whether you're in Arab culture or in the Western culture, is finding ways, providing feedback that sometimes is somewhat critical and somewhat uncomfortable, but doing it in a manner that is not confrontational, it's not demeaning, and it's offered in a constructive manner in which everybody wins from that standpoint. So I think that was a big change from the standpoint that allowed me to grow into being a better leader.
What a wonderful experience to have, moved overseas to such a different culture and to kind of be pressure cooked into having to change and adapt. It's interesting, right? Because it sounds so extremely different with everything that we've been hearing for the last decade or so, about being vulnerable, about being open. about not taking things personal, but understanding that it's about behaviors. All these great ideas that I think have allowed us to evolve. They are still in a different place there, right? Where having to save face is a matter of life and death, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
And as an auditor, right, you go in there and you're the bad guy. You're telling people what they're not doing right and what they've messed up in. So being able to figure out a way of communicating in a way that everybody looks good, right, and everybody comes out smelling like roses and feels like a winner, but yet you can make the change that's necessary. What a great skill! What a great skill! How does that skill translate to working with your clients right now and their management teams? Because again, you come in and you're going to be the outsider consultant, the bad guy that's going to tell us how we're screwing everything up. But that's not what they're going to feel like.
And again, I think you're correct that those skills are transferable. And whether it's in a Western culture or in an Arab culture, um, fundamentally, I think everybody wants to do a good job from that standpoint. And a lot of times just there's not clear communication from the standpoint of what we're really trying to achieve and how we provide, whether it's coworkers or our peers, with a clear understanding of what our expectations are. Because at the end of the day, people want to please, they want to do a good job, they want to be successful, but a lot of times they don't really understand what the expectations of the company are, of the management are, of their leader are. And so communication becomes one of the keys to really being successful, is being able to accurately and clearly and concisely communicate what the expectations are. And so, again, from the standpoint of being able to utilize that communication skill to provide insight into not just what you're recommending, but why you're recommending it, and making sure that there's a clear understanding and buy-in. Because again, unless there's an acceptance of what those recommendations are, you're never going to be successful. And so I think one of the things that really distinguishes our consulting is that we're not big on delivering reports that we give to management and then we walk away. Because one of the most critical success factors is the actual execution of implementing those recommendations. So more times than not, we're therefore helping the client implement whatever those recommendations are. So it's not a failure of, well, we had a good plan, you just didn't implement it properly. And so a lot of times that's whether you're implementing a new SAP, new ERP system, whether you're changing and bringing on a new product line, from the standpoint of making sure that everybody is on the same page and moving in the same direction. But to be able to do that, you really have to be a good communicator. What are we trying to accomplish? Who's responsible? And what is the timeline for doing that? Who, what, and when? And those are the three most important things, whether it's just being a daily manager from the standpoint of making sure we record journal entries on time and accurately, whether we close the books on time, whether we properly fund the acquisition that we're trying to acquire, or we've got the proper funding for whatever capital projects we're doing, making sure there's a clear understanding across the entire organization of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and when we're trying to get that accomplished. And I think more times than not, that's one of the reasons for not being successful, is everybody is not on the same page because there's not a clear communication plan.
Thank you, Otto. So quick reminder for our audience, you can go to practicalleadership.com or practicaleadership.com, and you can download a summary of today's podcast, and you'll also be able to download the tools that we will be discussing or building together in the next few minutes. Otto, so clear communication, which that starts with who, what, when, and really important, at the root of all evil, right? Or a lot of the problems comes from lack of expectations or the wrong expectations set. So that part I'd love to dive a little bit more into. But there's a part that I'm sure we're all intrigued to learn more about, right? Like, hey, how did you deal with the Saudis, right? Um, and how do you deal with CEOs and other people in an organization where they haven't been done what they were supposed to, or they didn't do it correctly, or they didn't have the tools, or they didn't use them correctly, but basically some way or somehow they were screwing it up some way, right? You've got to come in there and let them know, but still, you know, let them know that they weren't doing it a good job, but you're still in it with them and you're there to help them. How do you accomplish that?
A lot of it is just making sure they understood why that particular policy or procedure is in place. Um, Most people that are not in either a finance or management position don't realize the value of internal controls, segregation of duties, people different than the ones that prepare it, review it, all of the benefits from the standpoint of what are all the steps necessary to generate timely, accurate financial or operating information. Because we were operational auditors, that our job is trying to make sure that management had all of the information they needed to make timely, accurate management decisions, whether that's operating data or all of the various activities within the refinery working properly with something out. If that was the case, we're not going to be generating as much gasoline as we typically could. And so, from that standpoint, making sure that people understood why particular procedures or policies were in place. And by explaining that, what the ramifications of them not doing it properly. And so, from that standpoint, visiting with the management team, and at the same time trying to come up with positive opportunities that would enhance their operations at the same time you're offering criticism. So making sure that you're presenting more or less a balanced scorecard, if you will, that here's some things you didn't do properly, here's why they're important, but here's some other areas that we've been able to visit with the people that do things day in and day out. And those are typically the ones that have ideas that don't have an opportunity to get escalated from the standpoint of, here's something we could do that would make our operation more efficient. Now, you want to make sure that those types of decisions aren't made down in the rank and file, because they might not understand some of the ramifications of, well, if you change that, here's some other things down the line that aren't going to be done properly. So making sure you have a full understanding of what the implications are of some of the changes that may be recommended. But at the same time, it was not that different in the Arab culture, that the management wanted to make the right decision, but at the same time, they needed the right information to make those decisions. And so, again, it's pretty universal that you need timely, accurate information to make those critical business decisions, whether it's financial, whether it's operational, um, doing what is necessary to get that right information, and how can we make it more readily available? Whether do we need to change systems? Do we need to change? Are we generating reports that nobody's using? And so let's take the time away from doing those things that nobody's using and prepare something that helps them make the better decisions. And so by providing opportunities that created additional efficiencies or cost savings, at the same time you're coming up with something that may be critical, that you didn't do this right, but here's some opportunities that gives you more time to allow you to be more efficient to make those better decisions. And so by presenting that balanced scorecard really helps, whether it's in the Arab environment or even in the Western environment.
So it sounds like there's a lot of education and a lot of coaching happening along the way. So kind of try to summarize a little bit about what you said. It's you're helping them understand the value and the positive or negative consequences of the systems and processes that you're trying to install in the organization, or that you're trying to fix, or that you're trying to make sure are being followed. So when they can understand that, it helps them get more comfortable with it, and understand the bright future that's ahead because of the changes that will be happening and how that's going to make their lives better. And then you also said, look, it's not just about everything that's been done wrong. It's about talking about what's been done right, what is working, what is positive. So you're not, again, you're not seen as this person that is just going to provide all this negative feedback, but rather you're the person that's bringing in the solutions. So I can only imagine smiles as you're teaching and going through these things, right? And I can just imagine these aha moments going up in people's minds where they're like, oh, so that's why we have all these problems. That's why this isn't working. That's why that. And all these headaches and all these problems that have been building up and accumulating over years, now they start to see a sense of like, now I know how we're going to fix it. Now I know how we're going to make this run. And I'm sure like then you become the purveyor of the good news and the solutions and the progress. And it can kind of bring people and connect them with positive energy about doing better and forgetting about what we did wrong. So instead of focusing on what we did wrong, they are focused on how things are going to be much better because we figured out or we learned about what's not working. Is that somewhat accurate?
Exactly. And plus, it gives the opportunity of recognition of the staff that's coming up with possibly some of these creative ideas. You have opportunities for recognizing them, rewarding them for coming up with potential economic savings. So, incentivizing the employees to do the right thing and to be creative, to think outside of the box. What what could you do differently that would bring additional efficiencies, help make things more timely, more accurate. And again, it provides opportunities for advancement within the organization of people that are identified as being creative and coming up with solutions and being able to foster that sort of creativity within their own department. And so getting them to constantly think, not just when the auditors come in, but bringing that as pretty much the way that we operate our department or our division is we really look to be in a process of continual process improvement. What we continually look to do to bring efficiencies to our organization, where can we leverage our investment in technology to do things smarter, not harder. And so, from that standpoint, it really creates an environment where people are energized and looking for new opportunities to bring improvements to the organization and to make their lives easier as well as their managers' lives easier. And so, at the end of the day, everybody benefits.
Yeah. And again, I want to point that out again because typically when we think about CFOs or financial people, we are not thinking about innovation. And a lot of what you've been saying is about creating the opportunities to have innovation, to be creative, to find new solutions, to find new ways. Yes, there's a lot of tools that you're going to bring to the table that you're going to help people implement and that are going to help them solve problems. You're going to teach them and educate them into why those systems and processes are important and why they're going to benefit from them. But it's creating this opportunity for people to engage at a higher level and to feel good about themselves and to have a positive impact in their careers and to make the organization unique um, and an organization that's evolving and getting better every day, right? Not your typical,
Exactly.
again, not your typical financial conversation. Last time I said that you're like, no, the new CFOs have to be like that. But I think that a lot of people in our audience might still be thinking, well, that's not necessarily what I associate with that. But I do believe that the more successful CFOs, the more successful people in finance are being more innovative, are being more creative, and I think that the whole industry is demanding that as a whole.
No, I agree, and especially from the standpoint, and that's why the role and relationship between the CEO and the CFO is so important. That being able to collaborate, to brainstorm, to bounce ideas back and forth about where is the company really going, how do we get there, what are the things that we need to do, what do we need to quit doing to bring more efficiency to the organization, and being able to have that relationship where you can say some things that may be very critical of the organization, but how do we address those issues? Because again, um, as we've seen that just the last couple of years, it's an extremely difficult environment to operate. Things are changing. with a pandemic. Now we have a war in Europe that we never thought we would see in our lifetimes. And each one of those activities creates opportunities for us to step back, reevaluate. How do we pivot if we need to? How do we continue doing the things that are successful? But if something is not successful, we need to make those decisions very quickly and make the changes that need to be made. And so change is difficult, and it's a cause for resistance from a lot of people traditionally that I enjoy what I'm doing. I don't want to change. But we've seen that we have to be more nimble. We have to be more flexible. We need to be able to quickly identify when we need to make a change and not be afraid to make those changes. And so, again, it comes back to communication. How are we communicating what we're doing, why we're doing it, and making sure that everybody understands? It's not just, oh, we decided to go this direction, everybody jump on board and let's go. Not giving them the background and understanding so that they can really understand why that's happening is so, so important to success.
What a great concept, right? Because sometimes we feel like as leaders or as owners, people should just kind of follow us along because we know what we're doing or we think we know what we're doing, and we fail to recognize that we're dealing with humans and they have emotions and they have needs, and they themselves need to understand what's going on. And this old way of thinking about, well, the direction came from the top, we're changing, and everybody's like, okay, great, now we're rolling in that direction. That doesn't work anymore. And people really do need to understand, especially if you have great people in your organization. They're going to be people that are going to be questioning your thought, like your strategies, your thoughts, your idea. Heck, the motives. The motives get questioned quite a bit, right? Why are we doing this? Is it a personal gain? Is it a a corporate gain? Is it taking us closer to our long term goals, or is it a short term pivot because we're trying to adapt to something that I don't even understand? And you can you've mentioned this a few times, right? The importance of letting people know and understand what's going on. So how far into the organization do these changes need to be understood? Is it a management team level where the management team knows what changes are occurring, how they're happening, or does it like filter all the way down to the line workers? What's your perspective on that?
In my opinion, it needs to be filtered all the way through the organization. But obviously, the level of detail changes the further you get into the organization. Because again, the management team really needs to understand the very small details of what we're doing and why. Down into the rank and file employees, you don't need to get into that minutia of detail about what's happening and why, but they need to understand what the overall motivation is from the standpoint of, and that's where being a successful communicator is extremely important to being a successful leader, of knowing what level of information you need to communicate to your board and to your management team, different information to maybe covering analysts if you're a public company, to your division head, as well as to the rank and file employees. It's easy to forget about all of the level of background information you have that helps you better understand and be very positive about whatever decision you're making. But making sure that everybody understands, at least at a high level, what change is being done and why, so that they can have that understanding and motivation and understanding to get behind it. But again, I think operating in a vacuum leads to speculation, to making people make their own judgment calls about what is the motivation. And so again, the more information you can share, the better off you are. But again, it needs to be tempered based upon whatever audience you're addressing.
Excellent. So, Otto, in this big idea of communication, right, often comes up in leadership, and the importance of communicating clearly, having a story, connecting emotionally. How do you do it? Do you have an approach? Do you have a tool? Do you have just a philosophy? How do we actually implement it? Right, thinking about practical leadership. How can our audience take a little bit of what's in that brilliant head of yours and go out and start doing something tomorrow?
You're too kind. To me, I always try and think from the standpoint, if I was in their situation, what would I need to know to help me understand what we're doing and why we're doing it? So it kind of brings it back to a personal level from the standpoint of um, similar to my management style. I would never ask somebody to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And so being a leader from the standpoint of follow my lead, from the standpoint of doing, emulating, from that standpoint, doing things that I think would help me better understand transitions to the what I would communicate to, whether it's my management team, my CEO, my board of directors. So from that standpoint, um, you lead by example. And so from that standpoint, it's difficult for me to kind of communicate from the standpoint of how do I communicate what would I want to hear and how would I want to be treated by my leadership team. That I'm kind of a self-starter. I don't like to be micromanaged. Um, Give me, as we referred earlier, what do you want? When do you want it? And what does that look like? What is the deliverable? And so, from that standpoint, trying to create a communication tool that allows you to clearly and concisely communicate what is it that we're trying to accomplish so that everybody can understand it. And so, a lot of times that takes a lot of editing and practice from the standpoint of are you really clearly communicating what you're trying to get your audience to understand?
So you shared a lot here. Let me kind of go through some of these things that you mentioned. So the first one is put yourself in their shoes. Understand your audience. Put yourself in their shoes. Have some empathy, and try to figure out what they might be thinking about, how they might be feeling, and what they want, so you can provide that for them. Second, you said lead by example and never ask anyone to do anything you wouldn't be willing to do yourself, which kind of sets a precedent of again, both leading by example and not asking anything out of anyone that you don't think can be done or accomplished. You talked about, in other words, the golden rule, right? Like do unto others what you'd like to do unto you, and saying, how would I want to be treated, and what would I want to know, and what would I like to get, and all these things. So you have empathy, but you also have some introspection to kind of build a model of what the interaction or relationship should be, and then getting very clear on what they want. So you had mentioned before who, what, when, and why, um, but you kind of double down on this idea of what exactly is the deliverable. And I love that concept of deliverable, because so many times I hear people commit to concepts and ideas that are not really well kind of brought down to where the rubber meets the road, well landed, that the expectation can't be clearly set. And that's where there's a lot of frustration, right? Because we don't know what that deliverable is. Um, so how how do you try to get clear on that deliverable, right? Because sometimes, as most of the audience knows, I use kind of scaling up and other technologies to kind of define priorities, goals, that sort of thing. And many times I get priorities that are conceptual, and I've got to help them through that, and help them get it to a deliverable. How do you do that? How do you help um, people figure out, okay, this is what I expect from you. This is what I would see as project complete.
Basically, sitting down from the standpoint and making sure that we clear understand. I need a spreadsheet that shows me XYZ. What is the cash flow over time? How do we discount that back down so that we can come up with a number? So it really comes down to sitting down one on one and making sure that there is a clear explanation and an understanding. Because as you suggest, without that, different people perceive that deliverable differently. That I need a spreadsheet. Well, that spreadsheet could look like anything, but I need to be able to look at it by month, by quarter, for the next 5 years. You do something that's annual for the first 3 years. We both thought we were accomplishing what you were looking for, but without that clear detailed explanation of this is what I need and why I need it. And that goes into really helping develop what is that deliverable. Is it a spreadsheet? Is it a research report? What exactly does that deliverable look like? And it can only be accomplished by sitting down one-on-one and making sure that you repeat what do you think that deliverable looks like? And then we talk through it and then we agree and then we go on about our business. And so again, and it may take a couple of iterations. Here's the spreadsheet. Well, that's good, but I'd like to break it down, not just by these customers, but bring it down to another level of potential customers we can add to it. How much additional revenue if we were to be able to penetrate this market? And so again, it may not be accomplished the first time, but again, that's where periodically checking in. Here's what I've got. I know it's due in 2 weeks. Make sure I'm on the right track. And so there's where some opportunities of just validating the clear understanding of what that deliverable is before you get to the end of the timeline.
So getting together with the people that you're setting expectations for, doing one-on-one, getting very clear. And one of the things that I like that you talked a lot about is getting very clear on the functionality, right? So what is that deliverable? What does it look like? But you also kind of are explaining what functionality do we need to get out of this?
How
And
are we going to use that tool?
exactly. So it kind of you're setting the expectation of this is what I need to be able to get out of whatever it is that you're working on and building. So it also kind of gives them a little bit of wiggle room in space to be creative because they know what the outcome needs to be. So even though you're defining some boundaries of what you're expecting to see and get, there's also the big idea of what do we need to get out of this tool, which means if you have some freedom to innovate within it, which
Exactly.
which gives people a feeling of autonomy. Well, not just a feeling; they give it the autonomy to try to do their best work and to kind of surprise you with something that helps achieve the outcome, maybe even in a way that you might have not even thought about.
Exactly. And again, at the end of the day, you want to surround yourself with good people. And again, no one does anything or accomplishes anything individually. And so it's all about the team. And so the more you can encourage and enhance the creativity of your team, the more they can be self-directed. And as you're suggesting, come up with ideas that you didn't even think about. And again, being able to rely upon people to do the job you hired them to do, giving them that freedom of innovation, of creativity within a certain boundary just makes for a more productive and successful team.
Absolutely. So it's all about people, and you want to unleash their creativity, and you want them to be self-directed, because with that you're going to get outcomes that are going to be potentially superior than you even had imagined. So you're kind of creating the boundaries for them to play in, and then go out there and build something great. Let's go back to communication for just a moment, because I think this is one where a lot of people struggle because I hear it all the time, right? The big idea in communication is that it's not what you say, it's what other people hear. So that's kind of the premise of that. But how do you know if your communication is working? How do you know if people are getting it, if they're understanding, if they're processing, if they're really taking what you're saying to heart, which is going to, have an impact in a change in behavior or mindset or attitude or something? How do you know if communication is being successful?
It, it's difficult, and especially so as we're changing into a virtual environment, because not being in the same room, you don't get the opportunity of look at body language and reaction. Yeah, you can see a little bit of it on a screen, but that's one of the new challenges of a different work environment where we've got hybrid, we've got people working remotely. Some days they're in the office, some days they're not. A lot of it just comes down to follow-up discussions from that standpoint. Seeing the result of the product that they're generating. And so again, trust but verify. At the end of the day, being able to review what the deliverable is before it comes due, so that if there's any misunderstanding, you can nip it in the bud, get back on track. And again, making sure it's not every day I'm checking in on you. How's it going? Nobody likes to be micromanaged, saying from that standpoint. But again, it's becoming very challenging with the changing work environment. I think similarly with the younger folks that are coming in, they have a little bit of a different work attitude from the standpoint of they're not as opposed to change. They change jobs frequently. They're a different motivation from the standpoint. I've got the benefit of being able to bounce things off of both of my daughters that are very much involved in business. So it helps me get a better level set from the standpoint of what do 30, 40-year-olds thinking? I was there, but that was a long time ago. Things are changing. And so just having the benefit of their younger thought process and how they're looking at business, I think continues to help me have a better understanding of what does the changing workforce look like? Because as we mentioned earlier, you need to communicate differently depending on what your audience is, not necessarily where they are in the organization, but where they are from a standpoint generationally, because younger folks communicate differently. They're very quick on sending texts, abbreviations, things of that nature. And so again, being able to step back and communicate and making sure that they really understood what you're trying to say because they think differently and they hear differently. And so again, it's a challenge from that standpoint. But I think at the end of the day, it comes back to that one-on-one. Here's here's what we're trying to accomplish. What do you think? How do you feel about that? What do you see us doing? And from that standpoint, what do you see that deliverable looking like? And then talking through it from that standpoint. So again, I think a lot of it comes from making sure that that communication up front is clearly understood so that it can be accomplished through their actions.
Thank you, Otto. This has been fantastic so far. I'm going to try to summarize a few of the things because you've given us so much to think about. But there's a big idea, and this just continues to pop up throughout our conversation, right? And there, well, it's actually two parts. One is lead with a lot of clarity, right? Lots and lots and lots and lots of clarity all throughout. And education. So clarity in terms of what are we trying to do, why are we trying to do it, get very clear about what you're expecting from people, what are the deliverables you want from them, then trust but verify, check in with them, have follow-up meetings to check in on the progress and see how things are evolving. Set the kind of like the boundaries of what you're trying to accomplish, and then look for create an environment where there can be innovation, where they can look for opportunities that you might have not even thought about, and ask for that and develop innovation with part of your big idea, which is we've got to figure out how to get better. We've got to figure out how to get better. When it comes to change, communicate why the changes are needed, what the benefits are. Not only what is not working and what needs to change, but what actually is working and is doing well. So you can kind of balance those emotions, and it's not all bad. But once we change these things, your headaches are going to go away. Everything gets better when things get better type of approach, right? And a lot of that comes from kind of going overseas, working with a different culture where it was very important to say base, and you had to figure out how to provide that feedback, but at the same time make people look good. And that kind of actually works in Eastern and Western cultures. And how we're at the end of the day, we're all people. We all have egos. How we look to others is important to us. What we're able to accomplish is important to others. But you've been able to translate feedback into something that is positive, something that people are excited about, and something that allows you to build a team environment, team with a CEO and a team with the rest of the team to help them go out and accomplish great things with a again with a mindset of a team. To communicate well, you said, hey, let's put yourself in their shoes, understand your audience, put yourself in their shoes, lead by example, do unto others as you like done unto you. So you never ask anyone to do anything that you don't think could be done within the time frame, or it's something that might not be worth doing. Very clear on the deliverable, and again, very clear on the functionality. I'm sure I've missed a few great things that you've said. Hopefully, I've captured some of the most important ones. I'm sure there's some other things that you'd like to share with our audience before we kind of wrap up today. What is something else we haven't talked about, or I have asked you that you think could be valuable for our audience when it comes to practical leadership and how to help work through others?
You've done an excellent job of summarizing our conversation. I think, again, just to highlight, at the end of the day, I think people fundamentally want to be successful. They take pride in the work they do. And as leaders, it's up to us to create an environment where they feel comfortable participating, sharing. They're motivated by being rewarded for doing the job that they've been brought to do. And again, at the end of the day, management is responsible for creating that work environment that allows them to be successful. And again, providing them with the tools, whether it's training, whether it's the right systems, whether it's the right information, whether it's access to the right people that helps them do their job. Because at the end of the day, everybody wants to, I think a majority of people want to do a good job. They just need the right tools. And so it's up to us as managers to be able to provide that environment to allow them to be as successful as they want to be, or they're capable of being. And so from that standpoint, trying to find ways of continuing allow people to grow, to learn, to progress, providing opportunities for them to feel a critical part of an organization, because that sort of motivation, they've got buy-in, they're motivated, and whether that's stock options, whether that's profit sharing, how do you find the right motivation that provides an opportunity that allows people to be the best they can be?
What an awesome way of saying that, right? So people are good. They want to do great things. And our jobs as managers and leaders is to create an environment and provide them the tools that allow them to be their best selves. That is fantastic. Reminder for our audience, practicalleadership.com or practicaleadership.com. You're going to be able to download the summary of this podcast today with a few ideas on how to become a better leader based on Otto's learning and how he has done it. Otto, before I let you go today, what are some things that you're looking forward to? What are some things happening here in the next few weeks or months?
Um, well, I've been very blessed. I have two fairly new grandchildren. I've got four total. One that we were able to spend some time over the Easter holidays. So again, I've found that being a grandparent is one of the best things that has happened so far. So my wife and I are extremely privileged to have two daughters that have wonderful spouses, that have growing families. And so looking for the opportunity of continuing to grow the organization at Vaco, but at the same time, finding time for the personal regeneration of family time that at the end of the day, that's why I'm doing it, from the standpoint of just providing. One, I really enjoy working and helping clients, but at the same time, having opportunities to take time off and spend with family, which is the most important thing.
Excellent. So thank you for sharing that, right? The importance of family and the importance of people, and a dose of systems that make everything better. Otto, thank you so much for being in the podcast today. It's been fantastic. I appreciate the insights. I appreciate you sharing a little bit of your time, and hopefully have you again in the future to see how things have progressed with Vaco and and to dive a little bit deeper into some of the many other tools in your toolbox.
Thank you so much, Max. I've really enjoyed it. All the best.
Thank you.